Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a quiet but honestly an absolutely massive shift that is happening right under our noses. Millions of people all over the world are fundamentally changing how they seek out comfort. And get this, they're doing it through screens instead of going to therapists or friends. Actually, downloads for companion apps have totally skyrocketed, quietly becoming some of the most used apps on our phones. Now, at first glance, you might think this is just a tech story, right? A story about rapid AI advancement or a passing digital trend. But as we dig into the research and the hard data, it becomes incredibly clear that this isn't really a story about AI at all. It's a story about trust, human vulnerability, and a huge shift in how we cope with life's messy challenges. So we're going to break down the hidden psychology behind why so many people are actively choosing to converse with algorithms instead of the actual humans in their lives.
Okay, let's dive into this because this is really the central mystery of our explainer today. Why on earth would anyone choose a machine over a human being? On the surface, it makes absolutely no sense, right? Human beings are warm, we have the capacity to truly understand, we share lived experiences, and we fundamentally care. A machine, on the flip side, is literally just cold code sitting on a server somewhere. It doesn't have a heart, it has no memories, and it definitely doesn't have feelings. So why are millions of people opening a chat window when they need advice, reassurance, or just someone to vent to after a long, exhausting day? What is it that's drawing us to this cold code over a warm conversation?
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the surface level phenomenon first. When we normally think of AI, we picture productivity. But we're not talking about asking a chatbot to summarize some boring spreadsheet or debug code or draft a ridiculously polite email to your boss. That is not what's happening here. Millions are turning to AI for comfort, for company, and for deep connection. They aren't asking for facts or trivia, they're looking for a safe space to process their day, their anxieties, and their relationships. They want an environment where they can be heard without all those heavy, immediate pressures that come attached to a real-life human conversation. People are actively seeking emotional safety and, surprisingly enough, they're finding it in a totally artificial environment. So let's peel back the first layer of the onion here and dismantle the absolute most common assumption society makes about this behavior. The obvious assumption is that people who talk to AI are just antisocial, deeply lonely, or somehow disconnected from reality. It's super easy to picture that stereotype of a recluse hiding from the world, right? But psychology reveals that the truth is way more complicated and, honestly, a lot more sympathetic. The reality is that the person sitting alone with a screen usually isn't running away from people at all. They're running away from disappointment. They are actively trying to protect themselves against the uncertainty and the emotional toll that human beings inherently bring to the table. I mean, think about every real conversation you've ever had, even the really good ones. They all come with inherent risks. There's the risk of being misunderstood, the pure anxiety of watching those three little dots pulse on your screen as someone types a reply, or that paralyzing fear of being judged for what you've just shared. You start thinking, did I say too much? Do I sound foolish? Am I being a burden right now? Every single human interaction carries at least a small amount of uncertainty, and navigating that uncertainty takes a massive amount of emotional energy. For someone who has repeatedly experienced judgment, dismissal, or betrayal, well, vulnerability doesn't feel like a pathway to connection anymore. It feels like a pathway to pain. And frankly, navigating those risks day in and day out can be utterly exhausting. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the psychological mechanism actually driving this behavior. Psychologists describe this through a concept called an internal locus of control. Simply put, it's the deeply held belief that your life is shaped more by your own actions than by outside forces. People with a really strong internal locus of control often prefer solving problems completely independently. They trust their own reasoning, and they actively seek answers themselves rather than waiting around for someone else to step in. Over time, they become surprisingly comfortable carrying life's burdens all by themselves, trusting only themselves to navigate complex emotional landscapes, because, well, relying on others just feels wildly out of their control. But as this incredibly powerful quote points out, human beings rarely become self-reliant by accident. Most people become entirely self-reliant because at some point in their lives they learned that they absolutely had to be. Beneath all that fierce independence is often a pretty profound history of letdowns. Maybe it's a memory of being ignored when they desperately needed support, or a childhood where messy emotions were just swept under the rug. Or maybe a deeply valued friendship that just quietly disappeared without any explanation. It's that painful, crystallizing moment when asking for help actually felt significantly worse than just handling everything alone. Society so often celebrates the strong person who needs nobody, while completely overlooking the heartbreaking possibility that needing nobody was literally never their first choice. And this brings us to a really stark contrast in traits. Real people are fundamentally unpredictable.
We have moods, we get stressed out, we pull away, we change our minds, and sometimes, despite our very best intentions, we leave. That unpredictability is emotionally dangerous for someone who's been hurt before. AI, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. It's consistent. It is quite literally always available at 3 a.m. on a random Tuesday, and it's entirely frictionless. For a mind that has been completely exhausted by the unreliability and the emotional zigzagging of human beings, that artificial consistency doesn't just feel neat or convenient, it feels like a profound, overwhelming relief.
And that relief comes directly from the incredible power of predictability. An AI doesn't interrupt your train of thought to talk about itself. It doesn't mock you for feeling anxious over a silly text message, and it never, ever rolls its eyes when hearing about the exact same problem for the 20th time. It has absolutely no hidden agenda, and it requires nothing in return. This completely removes all the social pressure from the equation. For maybe the first time in their lives, users feel completely free to just think out loud, to vent and to explore their feelings without that paralyzing fear of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. It's just a perfectly sterile emotional environment. So the crucial point is, this brings us to a major complication. It's a huge paradox, really. The exact thing that makes AI so incredibly comforting is precisely what makes it psychologically risky. The absolute lack of friction, the ironclad guarantee that you will never be challenged, pushed, or misunderstood in a meaningful way, it feels incredibly safe and soothing in the short term. It's kind of like emotional junk food. But in the long term, entirely frictionless relationships carry a massive hidden danger that we urgently need to unpack. Because taking all the bumps out of the road might actually make us forget why we built the road in the first place. To truly understand this risk, we have to recognize why friction is actually absolutely essential. Think about it. Every meaningful human relationship you have ever had required a few really messy steps. First, it starts with disagreement, which is often followed by misunderstanding. And yeah, those moments are uncomfortable for sure. But the real magic happens at the next step, repair after conflict. And that repair is what inevitably leads to the final step, meaningful growth. Human relationships do not become profound or deep because they are perfectly easy and smooth from day one. They become meaningful because they survive difficulty. Friction isn't just where pain comes from. It is the exact place where growth, trust, and real intimacy actually happen. Which leads us to a vital question you really have to ask yourself. If comfort becomes easier than connection, what happens to our relationship skills? Learning to communicate effectively, learning to truly trust someone else, learning to handle a stinging rejection, or learning that a disagreement doesn't automatically equal abandonment. These are all highly complex skills. And just like any skill, like playing the piano or shooting a basketball, they only develop and stay sharp through active, ongoing practice. If we start relying entirely on frictionless, perfectly curated interactions with machines, we risk severely degrading our ability to handle the messy, beautiful, frustrating reality of building real human trust. Let's move to and see how this builds into real-world behavior. It's really important to clarify here that talking to AI isn't inherently unhealthy or automatically detrimental. It all comes down to how it's being used. Two people can spend an hour talking to an AI and have completely different outcomes. One person uses AI as a tool. They use it to safely organize their messy thoughts, maybe practice what they want to say, and calm their anxiety before reaching out to a real friend. That is a highly functional, really healthy use case. The other person uses AI as a total replacement. They pour their heart out to the machine, and then, feeling temporarily satisfied, they never reach out to the human at all. It's the exact same technology, but it has an entirely different psychological impact on their lives. And that brings us to the real climax of our explainer today. Maybe the machine didn't create the loneliness. Maybe it exposed it. I mean, wow. This is a profoundly powerful realization. This sudden, massive rise of AI companionship isn't necessarily showing us something brand new about how amazing or hypnotic technology is. Instead, it's acting as a mirror. It's showing us something we have been avoiding about ourselves for decades. It's revealing just how emotionally disconnected, how lonely, and how unheard a vast, silent portion of society already felt long before these chatbots were ever written into existence. The gap was already there. The AI just stepped right into it. So to summarize the data and the psychological profiles we've looked at today, people turning to AI are not broken and they aren't defective. They're simply making a very human calculation to protect themselves. They're choosing predictability over uncertainty. They're choosing safety over risk, and they're choosing absolute control over vulnerability. It is a completely natural defense mechanism for deep-seated unmet needs. Underneath all the fancy algorithms and the complex conversational models, people are craving something incredibly simple and incredibly human. They just want to be heard without judgment and to be accepted entirely without conditions. So, if a machine can provide even a small synthetic version of that safety, maybe the real question of our time was never why people started talking to artificial intelligence in the first place. Maybe the harder, much more important question we need to leave you with today is this: why did so many of us stop feeling safe enough to talk openly with each other? Think about that the next time you hesitate to share your true thoughts with a friend. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we continue to break down the complex world around us.